Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you sharing some of your time this afternoon to talk about the joint LexisNexis and Salesforce presentation on leveraging the cloud and whole person data for PHE Unwinding. I'm joined by Anna Mealy and Rod Brimby today. Let me go ahead and go on to the next slide, please, Anna. We'll do our introductions. As I said, I'm Trey Harrison. I think it's easy enough to introduce myself and as the introduction kind of to this topic, if you will. I've been with LexisNexis for 13 years, but been working in Medicaid data since the 90s. And it wasn't until I came to LexisNexis that I realized just how little of the information that we needed to do our job that we actually had. We had what the state knew about people, which is oftentimes very dated, incomplete, and just not correct. We were typically either trying to catch bad folks doing bad things or improve the care of the people in the Medicaid agency's charge. And when I came to Salesforce, when I came to LexisNexis, I was struck by this wealth of information that LexisNexis had, and immediately struck by all the amazing things that we could do with it in terms of updating addresses, updating contact information, understanding when people had died or moved out of state, all of the important things that I was very excited. We'd go to state agencies and say, hey, we've got to help you out with this. We've taken a look at your data, and oh, here's 30,000 people who look like have moved out of state, or here's 50,000 people who have changed addresses or changed phone numbers, and don't you want this? And we would we would lay that on the table at the state agency we met with, and it was like a box of raccoons or live snakes you were laying on the table, because the data, yes, everybody agreed was valuable. The insight was valuable, but there was no way to make it actionable. Those were 30,000 operational problems I was laying on somebody's desk. Those were 30,000 things that needed to happen that the agencies didn't have the facility, either the software solution or the operational facility to deal with and to process and to move in the organized way that they had to keep up with policy and to stay in line with handling the data and handling the operation of the way they dealt with. And that's part of the reason I'm so excited to be working with our co-presenters today from Salesforce, because what you're going to see is a way to move the pig through the python, if you will, in terms of getting the benefits of the real world data in the context of unwinding. We're talking about unwinding here, but in general, finding out the things that the agencies need to know about individuals in their programs, but dealing with it in a way that is appropriate to policy, that has an operational, it's not a nightmare. There's a facility for working the information and integrating it into states' programs. So unwinding is the moment, right? That's what we're all here for. It's in the title of the slide. But I think more generally, as we go through this, we can think of, the need to know where people are and the need to understand the people that we're serving doesn't end with unwinding. But what is important to remember is that you need a process, and you need a proper workflow and some assistance getting the benefits of that actionable within the Medicaid enterprise. So you're going to help us sort of, okay, how do we work this operationally? How can tech work that pig through the python, if you will? As I said, very pleased to be joined by Rod Brimby. He's a extremely decorated, if you will, Medicaid administrator, both as commissioner in Connecticut of the Department of Social Services, as well as the secretary of Kansas's Department of Health and Environment, where he served for 8 years as secretary. I was joking with him before we got on the call. Those are dog years. 8 years as secretary is more than 8 years on my calendar. So very impressive. He's their regional vice president of digital transformation in the public sector group. As you can imagine, from a policy lead standpoint, concept of leader in the marketplace, knowing what this market really needs, giving the vision to that side of the house. Also joined by Anna Mealy. She's the lead solutions engineer of their public sector operation. So she's going to be the one to guide us through how the technology that Salesforce has with its marketing cloud can solve the problems that Rod knows all about and can really match up the technological capabilities with these real world problems, unwinding being the most obvious of them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rod to kick things off. I'll come back when it comes time to talk about the LexisNexis data stuff. And I'll come back. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And there is also a help icon, sort of technical issues. But as I say, I'll come back when it's time to talk about LexisNexis data. I'm going to talk Q&A. With that, Rod, why don't you take it away? Rod, did you wind up getting on mute by any chance? We seem to be having some technical difficulties with Rod. I think the problem we're talking about here is not anything new that anyone on this call might not recognize. Obviously, Medicaid enrollment was growing anyway before the pandemic, and it has not slowed down. In fact, obviously the pandemic exacerbated that, and there was an unsurprising swelling of the rolls.
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. There you go, Rod.
All right. I'm sorry. Thanks, Trey.
This close to just doing your stick. All right.
All right. I want to thank everyone for being here. Technical issues happen, but let me just get started by saying that during COVID, the federal government stepped in and initiated a policy known as continuous enrollment, and that stopped states from disenrolling people from Medicaid, even if they were no longer qualified or they failed to update their eligibility information. The COVID-19 public health waiver then helped generate record Medicaid enrollment at the time when health insurance coverage was critical to protecting the US population's well-being. And that's where Trey was coming in. What the slide depicts is that total enrollment grew to 91.3 million in October 22. That's an increase of 20.2 million, or more than 28.5% from February 2020. Almost 1 in 4 Americans relied upon Medicaid for service. And many Medicaid recipients, as you might recall, were frontline workers at the outset of the pandemic, and some were even caregivers to the most vulnerable. So it was essential that they had Medicaid coverage. So this waiver was crucial in securing the public's trust during this global crisis. So while the pandemic has not ended, and we know that all too well, on March 31st, continuous enrollment will end. And that's going to trigger a year-long process called unwinding, where everyone whose Medicaid coverage was extended as a part of the waiver will need to be reevaluated for eligibility. It's important for eligible program participants to remain covered so that they can get access to tests, vaccines, and other COVID treatments, as well as traditional medical care. Now, this unwinding is a daunting administrative task because the complete verification process has to occur over 9 to 12 months. Now, CMS recommends to states that they process no more than 1/9 of their caseload each month in all but 2 months of the renewal process. We often talk of COVID as generating human history's largest mass vaccination campaign. The unwinding of PHE will generate the largest Medicaid eligibility verification process in the program's history. Now, some states have thought through this and said, we can issue these passive renewals, and that's a process that they can automatically renew Medicaid coverage using data that's already known to the agency, either through the Department of Labor or IRS, or even like the SNAP Medicaid or SNAP program. If someone has zero income, they can issue a waiver or request a waiver of CMS and then be able to passively renew individuals on the program. But if households can't be passively renewed, Medicaid programs will require these program participants to verify their personal information, address, income, and household size. States will typically send a renewal form to the homes of program participants and then attempt to contact them by email, phone, or text message to remind them to complete the form either online, by phone, or returning it to the agency. Members will generally have something like 30 days to provide that information, or the state can remove them from the program. It's estimated that as many as 15 million people could lose their Medicaid coverage. Now, how can states execute this event while maintaining or increasing the public's trust? That's the $50 million question. In a typical year, some 25% of Medicaid members have gaps in coverage. Now, these short-term gaps in coverage and re-enrollment are also known as churn. One of the greatest barriers to consistent eligibility is maintenance of accurate addresses for Medicaid members. Many states experience high rates of return mail at considerable program costs. Now, the process of executing a successfully eligibility verification process will require states to use new tools and take advantage of what the research tells us about the most efficacious communication channels for Medicaid customers. Some 97% of people with incomes less than $30,000 have a cell phone. Yeah, that's more than some high wealth individuals. Pew estimates that 97% of Americans text at least once daily, and 31% of people prefer text messages to phone calls. So this unwinding affords organizations an opportunity to digitally transform their eligibility and enrollment process to include these new communication tools, and to ensure that Medicaid members no longer eligible for Medicaid are provided information and a frictionless access to other forms of low or no cost healthcare plans often found in health insurance marketplaces or on the Federal Health Insurance Exchange. Anna's going to share some of those ideas shortly. I'm going to wind up here by just sharing two quick proofs of concept regarding the use of text messages to enhance communication. New York City some years ago worked with Ideas 42, a nonprofit, to introduce text reminders for people who receive court summonses, not the same issue, but the same concept. Text reminders reduce failure to appear rates by 26%. When paired with a redesigned summons form, making it cleaner, easier to understand, the failure to appear rates decreased by 36%. And lastly, Code for America, working with the state of Louisiana, found that text message reminders improved outcomes, nearly doubling those key metrics in some cases. Texts reach customers of all backgrounds cheaply and efficiently, while supplementing communication gaps from undelivered mail, and then, get this, created feedback loops with real data from real users that served as an early warning so that frontline workers could act efficiently. So just know that this is an opportunity to help organizations digitally transform their eligibility programs using new tools. Back over to you, Trey.
Okay, good. Describing how we see this issue, and by we I mean LexisNexis and the notion of identity data that's outside of a per se. Medicaid agency sees I've got 1 million current enrollees, so I have to do 1 million things. I have to go through 1 million of these re-enrollment events. From a public record standpoint, from a data volume standpoint, at that level you're talking about, we see it a little first step in there as being very essential. Yes, there's 1 million people on your rolls right now. However, there's an easy way to find out how many of those folks have died or have moved out of state or who are incarcerated, or all of these things that would immediately take them out of the million that you have to deal with from a real standpoint, and move them to a completely different workflow. There's a different policy path for dealing with an indication of death than there is for this whole PHE unwinding. So right up front, we call it a snapshot. We've done this with a few states. We call it a data cleansing, whatever you call it, a cleanup to get the identities into the right work plan path, rather than, as Rod said, sending a packet out. We've heard states sending a packet out to everybody, big thick packets with, a whole bunch of return mail expenses attached to them. That kind of hurts my heart as a taxpayer when you're sending out things when you really should know that's shouldn't happen, sending out a 40-page packet. So right up front, we talk about doing that cleansing. And then there's the move along to contact. Okay, now we've winnowed down that million to who we really know we need to reach for unwinding. We get to the contact data. An important part of contact data is that it goes bad. It changes, especially in this population. It changes from time to time. So we're very adamant about, as we work with states, moving the moment of data acquisition to the moment of use, as close as possible to the moment of use. For states who want to kind of handle that in an unsophisticated way, we can run a weekly batch, and so a weekly or monthly batch, and you go through, tell us how many you need, and we'll go through that. What is far more effective, and what we're excited about to be working with Salesforce with, is to move that to the moment of actual use via an API, where someone needing to call Trey as a Medicaid recipient or needing to reach Trey gets the right number, gets the most current number at that moment of use. We can do all of the things to identify if the number is SMS-able, if it's a messageable phone. For address information, we can indicate where the source is in COA. There is separate guidance for how states can utilize data address changes that come in via NCOA, so we can flag those. But the most important thing is, when it relates to contact data, is having it be fresh. And what Anna's going to show you here in a minute, how the marketing cloud solution can move that to the freshest possible, freshest moment of. You open it up brand new, Then along the way, there's continuous care needs. If states should want to triage folks who are more vulnerable for various conditions, we can supplement with clinically validated socioeconomic health risk indications, be they transportation, housing instability. We've done a lot of work on housing in the Medicaid arena, social isolation, things like that. We can flag for triaging and workflow considerations, as well as follow-up or anything you might want to do after the fact. And then at the actual moment of eligibility, there's information that you need to know, things about assets for your age-blind and disabled, things like, as I mentioned earlier, incarceration. We've reached Trey, now we need to decide, is he really eligible? There's a data component to that. And finally, monitoring. As I mentioned at the outset, the ability or the need to know more about people to better serve them in the Medicaid program doesn't end when unwinding ends. Agencies still really need to know where people are. You think of simple things, simple analytics that are maybe around hotspotting or looking for pockets of need. If you don't know where somebody's really living, you could have the best analytic package in the world. It's not going to make any sense, because your hotspot's based on where somebody lived 6 months ago, and maybe it's not that hot anymore. So we see it as a continuous cycle of update that can be facilitated to a large degree through the automation that Salesforce offers. Happy to discuss any questions along the lines related to the data at the Q&A, but let's get right into Anna's component of the presentation to kind of see how this works in action and walk through how things can be automated into state's workflow. Go ahead, Anna.
Awesome. Thank you, Trey. So where Salesforce takes the baton from here is, once we have all that high quality data, not just from LexisNexis, but other systems as well, we can compile that and then ideally start to meet citizens where they're at. And so where our communications and outreach tool really fits in is being that bridge between our state agencies and the members that they serve. And how can we kind of get ahead of some of the issues that they have, of course, questions related to the PHE and even consistent renewal. How can we get ahead of that and provide them with tools at every step of the journey that makes that trusted relationship really happen? And so the one takeaway from this slide in particular is that we really focus on keeping the citizen at the center. If we speak to them in the right channel with the right message at the right time, we know from the data that that actually drives the outcomes that our state agencies need in terms of communicating with their members. And again, getting those actions that Rod and Trey have described thus far. So let's talk about process. We've talked about the philosophy at large, but if we're actually going to put this into action, here's kind of the overall flow of how we think about taking this fantastic data and then activating it, so to speak. So the three-step process here is, first, we'll talk about ingesting data from multiple sources. So the great thing about Salesforce is that we can take information from anything like LexisNexis, of course, is a primary source, to our Service Cloud information, anything in our case management platform, even your MMIS platform. So if you have legacy technology, there's ways that we can work with that and use it to actually put into Marketing Cloud for the purpose of outbound communication. So we'll talk about getting that data in the platform. Once it's in there, we want to think about building thoughtful, actionable segments. So how can I use those great data sets, compile them into different subsets of my audience, and then take those and activate them or really engage? So that third step of engaging with my citizens across the channels that they use. So back to Rod's point at the beginning, if 97% of our citizens in this particular subset have cell phones, then it would make perfect sense to create a text-based campaign that reminds them or sends those little nudges to complete critical actions that we need as a state agency to make sure we close out our end of the loop here. So this is the nutshell version. We're going to walk through that in the demo, so we won't go into too much more detail. Before getting there, I want to talk about current customer success story. So a flagship example here is the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And through the strategic communications plans that we're talking about here, they've seen incredible success with member engagement. So just a couple of the highlights here, their open rates and click rates on their outbound communications are significantly higher than the government average. So already a big win there. The state also built a really well-designed self-service portal, and they use this tool to drive portal adoption, because that's really change management at that point. You're training members, hey, you're used to walking into an office or submitting that packet of information, whatever that might be. We actually have this great portal, so here's how to use it, and just proactively communicating around that process. One stat that's not listed here that's probably most profound related to the PHE is a really simple campaign that they sent out asking or proactively reaching out to their members saying, hey, we haven't heard from you in a while. Can you update your address or verify your address? From that single campaign, they had a 43% response rate on members actually raising their digital hands, going in and making sure that the state had the accurate address on file. So just bookmark this story, keep it in mind, and just start to think about, hey, if we got ahead of some of our communications challenges, what might we see downstream in terms of the actions we need, again, to be successful in our roles? So with that, we're going to view the tool today from the perspective of a communications and outreach director. So my name is Susan, and our really simple workflow today is going to be how Susan can easily build a cross-channel communications campaign, taking that awesome data from LexisNexis and activating it to our digital channels for the purpose of engagement. Time permitting, we'll look at some reports as well. So how can Susan actually translate these results up to her larger team and say, hey, here's what we're doing from a communication standpoint that's actually moving the needle towards our strategic objectives. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And Trey, if you can just give me a thumbs up that everyone can see this. Awesome.
I see it in one place. I see it where your picture was.
Perfect. I think that should be good.
I think that's right.
Awesome. All right. So like I said, we're going to walk through a really simple example here. But as Susan, the idea is that I can come to Marketing Cloud and complete anything I need to do in a given day from one tool. And so we want to talk about efficiency and ease of use. We know that in most cases, a state agency has limited, if any, communications and outreach support. And so how can we hand them a tool that's going to make it easy for them to accomplish this without having to heavily code or really go into the back end or even tap IT on the shoulder to get their job done? So from here, Susan can create emails, text messages. The bulk of her time is actually going to be in a tool we call Journey Builder. So this is our automated communications and outreach tool that allows Susan to create these thoughtful cross-channel campaigns in line with actions that members need. So information they need to receive. From my Journeys dashboard, you can see we have a lot of different use cases for them. So beyond the PHE redetermination announcement, so to speak, or preparation process for her members, Susan can also use this to perhaps recruit providers in an underserved area. So she might know from her data, hey, we need to recruit some new providers in this particular part of our state. So let's use this tool to kind of go out that process. Same thing goes for recruiting individuals for the contact center. We can use this tool to actually be that engine for communicating with potential employees or current employees. Maybe it's annual renewals. So again, we're talking about the PHE today, but the use cases here really extend far beyond this moment in time to the long-standing communications workflows we need to set up to effectively communicate across our different segments. So a lot of different use cases, but point being, Susan's going to basically create a simple campaign here to communicate with her current members about this upcoming change. So from the center here, again, ease of use is really the focal point of the platform and its design. What Susan can start to do is just drag and drop the different elements that need to go into her communications campaign and start to, of course, measure or optimize this as she learns more about what's working and what isn't in reports. So her entry source in this example is going to be that thing that tells Marketing Cloud, hey, when we have this information, go ahead and launch that email. So in this example, maybe it's a data extension with LexisNexis information saying, hey, here are all my active current residents who need to receive this particular message. It can come from other tools as well, though. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of getting information in the platform. The idea here is that Susan really wants to focus this key message on those individuals most in need of receiving it. So we're trying to kind of grow in our maturity in communication and get away from that batch and blast approach where we send out this first renewal reminder, goes into a black hole. We don't know if it was successful or not. And we're going to start with really highly targeted, a list of individuals, again, coming from those great data sources themselves. Once Susan's determined that entry point, she's going to start using her additional channels here. So like we said, great use case for the PHE is leveraging text messaging as a way to communicate with members. So Susan's going to start to pull in some additional channels. More importantly, she's going to use these controls on the left-hand side to really dictate where her audience should move based on an individual's particular attributes or behavior. So in this example, Susan's going to say, hey, let's go ahead and send that first announcement email or message to the channel that an individual member most prefers. So let's call this, a million individuals on that data extension right away. Let's ensure that the first message they receive related to unwinding goes to the channel that, maybe a particular individual is most likely to use. So channel preference is going to say, hey, let's send our text message campaign to those individuals who've opted in for mobile, whereas my email reminders will go out to this batch. Beyond that, Susan can start to look at behavior itself as well. So she's going to pull an engagement split onto her track that says, hey, if people are actually clicking through or engaging with that first email, that's fantastic. We know that they're getting the message. Maybe they took an action on a particular link that said, oh, they're going to go ahead and complete the next step for me. That's fantastic. That message, maybe it's a confirmation or more targeted information related to their unique use case. Susan's message there is going to differ than that message to those people that aren't responding. So folks who receive that email, we know we have great data. Again, we know we have quality information on our hands. How can we then start to tailor our message based on the non-response? So people who are not connecting with me anymore. For that batch, Susan can do something simple like drag that same email onto her track and simply change the subject line in hopes that that urgency, maybe the urgency in her tone drives a click through that we're looking for. She can try a different channel like WhatsApp, but she also might want to use some digital advertising. So this is not something we often think about in the case of state communications, but what we can do is use digital ads to actually find some retargeting opportunities and just a high level digital advertisement saying, hey, news around the PHE or benefits are changing. And what Susan can do is, for those non-responders, again, kind of focus her efforts on people who need to receive that digital nudge. One thing we kind of coach our customers on is the idea that what you say to people is as important as what you don't say at times. So in this example, let's not send that reminder or digital nudge to individuals who have completed some sort of verification step that we no longer need. Don't send the reminder if they've done the action. That's going to be confusing and tone deaf. The idea here is we're taking that marketing and communications focus and pointing it towards those people who fit a certain category. In my example today, that's non-response. And we also have a print mail provider. So we have a lot of partnerships. One of those that comes up a lot with our state agencies is the idea of continuously sending print mail as well. And so Susan isn't limited just to digital. She can actually go ahead and, again, focus her print budget, her time, her message on that subset of her members, again, who haven't completed any sort of verification and aren't responding across our other channels. So this is making the most of a limited budget and time. The last step, let's say it's the final step Susan has in her tool belt here to communicate with those members, is actually pulling in some of the other Salesforce tasks related to case management. So she might go ahead and create a task, and that's going to kind of ping her support team to call or follow up with a member one-on-one or more directly. In this sense, you can kind of think of Marketing Cloud or communications as an extension of your service and support team. We're just putting all of these communication nudges in on the front end in the hopes that when your support team or your call center does get a phone call from a member, it's qualified to the extent that you know they really need that one-on-one support. It's making the most of limited time, limited capacity, and using communications proactively to get ahead of that. So there is a lot more we could talk about here. In the interest of time, we're going to gloss over it. But one thing, and the last thing I'll point out from this screen, is that what you're seeing here is a really full-built communications campaign, leveraging a lot of different channels. A lot of our customers are still in that batch and blast mode, and they aren't familiar with this yet. And so the great thing about our tools at large, again, in the name of ease of use, is that you can start small and have that, let's call it the LexisNexis data source, and then your renewal reminder, have 3 steps in an email process, and that's it. You can grow into the tool if it's something that you're not comfortable with today, and we have great resources to kind of support you in that process. All right, so let's fast forward in time and assume that Susan has sent out her campaign and she wants to start to monitor her performance. Again, this is an ongoing process of learning about what our citizens need. Again, if you remember that wheel with a citizen at the focal point, how can we continue to serve them by just using the data we're collecting to surface insights? So the tool you're looking at here is goes far beyond just open rates and click rates. And the idea is that we can take that and actually learn much more about our audience through an intelligence tool. So intelligent insight about our communications at large. Through this pre-built dashboard, Susan can quickly scan through and say, hey, I want to focus on my PHE redetermination campaign or a particular journey. And as she scrolls down, she can start to kind of monitor at a high level how all of her emails in a given campaign are performing. So this is at a glance real-time data that saves Susan a ton of time. You know, if you contrast this to pulling a CSV file from a different email tool, trying to interpret it on your own, at a glance, Susan has this great information available to her. So she might come in and hover over the first email in a re-engagement campaign and say, hey, looks like a personal subject line in that first email drove a relatively high open rate compared to our generic message in our welcome campaign or onboarding for new members. So Susan's going to take that little data point and say, hey, let's jump into our welcome journey, just quickly adapt that, and then, of course, start to measure this over time so that she starts to learn more about what really moves the needle with member engagement. The last thing that Susan might do here is start to understand audience breakdown by their actual engagement. Again, couple things to note are understanding engagement by day of the week. And so Susan, again, might hover over this and at a glance know that Sunday is going to be a top performing day for her members to engage with her emails. So she'll prioritize that first announcement, hey, we need to go through this redetermination process on a Sunday, whereas Friday maybe takes a back seat. She might not see the engagement she's looking for on a Friday. So again, all of this is updated for Susan. She can quickly make decisions from here. Last thing to note, in my mind, the most valuable is the ability to understand engagement by segment of your audience. And so within this, Susan can hover over her different segments, and these can be driven by demographic, geographic, any information you're collecting about your members and slicing that into these segments for Susan to then see, hey, looks like we have a high unsubscribe rate for this particular age range maybe. So Susan can tap into her audiences from here, understand what they've received, and then again, use this to adapt her future campaigns or even the ones that are currently running that she can simply pause, adapt, and then kind of reactivate. Lastly, so good chance for most of you all, you're not going to be logging into the tool every day. Maybe that's Susan's job, but other people care to know about your online engagement. So from here, Susan can schedule this report. All of this will be delivered in this nice visual format that we're looking at and share this with her team. Of course, export it to other formats and then share it one-to-one via email or Slack as well. The idea here is elevating the role of communications and starting to highlight to your larger team, hey, here's the value of what we're serving up. Here's what it's doing for our members, for our larger goals. Here's how it's reducing churn, those types of conversations. And with this dashboard, the tool we're offering, you can align that with other efforts to just really understand what members need and again, how you can help them more effectively. So that is your rapid nutshell version of our kind of solution at large here, talking about looking at the data that we're collecting from LexisNexis under sources, putting that in these thoughtful campaigns, and then of course, activating and engaging with your members from there. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Trey for some Q&A here.
Sure. Thanks for that, Anna. As you were scrolling through that, I was struck by, yes, again, we're talking about the PHE unwinding moment, but my brain was just firing on other uses for other reasons you would want to outreach to the Medicaid member population, especially if you had a segment of the population that you wanted to deal with in a certain way, some disease specific stuff, some socioeconomic specific stuff. States could really get more interactive with the members down any path. I mean, obviously unwinding is the moment, but I think there's tons of ways to utilize the technology to get more sophisticated about things that we're probably doing with stone tools today, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, want to thank everybody for the participation. Again, we're going to look through the questions. We're going to hit those here in a second. If we don't get to anything, we'll certainly follow up with emails to you. Just let me grab a couple of these that I'm looking at. Anna and Rod, I'm sure this one would be for y'all. Is there a best practice for getting opt-ins or consent to utilize texts or to text contacts? I got my words mixed up there. How does that work? How does the opt-in work? Yeah, great question. We get that a lot. So just from the communication standpoint, and I'll let Rod speak to maybe policy changes that have happened around that, but one thing we've seen states do very successfully is acknowledge current connection points with members. So let's call it the call center as a primary one, and simply adding to that call center script, hey, we have this text campaign. Can we communicate with you via email or text, and getting that opt-in in an existing sort of relationship. So call center scripts are a great way. In Marketing Cloud, we didn't get into this, but there are also the ability to create landing pages. So one-off landing pages that get that opt-in, and you can start to collect an individual member's preferences, and then again, attach that to core systems that we know who we actually can communicate with via text or otherwise. So that's the sort of strategic communications angle. Rod, do you have anything to add from, again, the policy standpoint?
I do, Anna. I think you provided a great approach for opt-in. Opt-in is always preferred. But last month, the Federal Communications Commission issued a declaratory ruling for states and their partners to say that they can send Medicaid enrollment calls and text messages to members who've not opted in. And this is without violating the robocall or robotext prohibitions. So typically, we do want people to opt in, but the FCC indicated that because this is such a critical issue, you don't need to have an opt-in provision to utilize these tools.
That's important. And before we start talking about this, I did not know that. I think that's important because a lot of states are struggling with in a massive outreach capability. Obviously, mail is expensive, and text represent a quicker, possibly more effective method, probably likely more effective methodology. So the fact, as you said, Rod, that FCC's lightening up on that is, I think that's extremely important in this context.
Absolutely.
So good. Thanks, guys. Are there, okay, I've got another one. Are there approaches that can be applied to other benefit programs? This kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'll take this one. I sure do. As of next month, the SNAP benefits will be reduced back to pre-pandemic levels, but outreach to program participants to update their information, their family information, would also be helpful because they may have grown in size or have reduced income that could affect how much of a benefit they'll receive. So using these tools to do progressive outreach is also helpful in many other benefit programs. So yeah, this is a great question as well.
So yes, I think we're settling in on a theme here. Yes, unwinding is a moment, but in any instance where a state has a very, very vested interest, a need, a desire, a mission critical aspect to get engagement with a member or a client, I think that's what we're talking about here, right? It's not just unwinding. Unwinding is, yeah.
No, unwinding is the compelling event to help states and programs do more digital transformation of their services. So absolutely, Trey.
I think we can use this as a springboard to get better about how we do what we do as a nation, as state agencies, and leverage some of the technology and some of the tools that the private sector has been on for quite a while, but that we can use here in the public sector. So that's excellent. Thank you. Are there any results from implementations so far or projected results? I'll let you guys start with this one, and then I'll kind of finish up from a data perspective.
Yeah, so Kentucky is a great story. That's a kind of proven consistently in terms of the outcomes that they're seeing. The other thing to consider with implementation is just working with a great partner that can also serve as a strategic voice to say, hey, here are the campaigns to think about. And we've seen that be one of the most successful approaches, is considering, in addition to our in-house resources that think about the communication that needs to go out or to whom, working with a partner that can also kind of consult and advise while helping you set up the tool itself.
Okay. From the LexisNexis standpoint, we have a bunch, technical term, somewhere in the teens of states who are already utilizing us, or I guess before redeterminations got stopped, have contracts to utilize us from an eligibility standpoint and an enrollment data standpoint. They have started reaching out. We're preparing to sort of start those machines going again. We've gotten some outreach work with some states, and we actually had a lesson learned that informed my disclaimer earlier in terms of the moving the moment of use to the moment of pulling the contact information. We did have a state take some time, if you will, between pulling a massive amount of addresses from us and actually using those and starting to act on those. And that was something that we certainly recommend against. Addresses in this population change all the time. That's probably the most sort of rapidly decaying data element that we have. So that was that. Lessons learned. We now get a lot closer with our state agencies when talking about, okay, how many responses do you need and when are you going to use them? Because we'd like to give them to you that day and have you act on them that day. And as I said before, that's the reason we're excited to be working with Salesforce in this context, because we're in this solution, in this context, we're talking about moving the use of the data to the moment that you pull it and getting the very freshest data. The next one probably for me, what is the data coverage? Although Anna, there's probably, you guys can fill in the stuff in addition to what Lexis is talking about. And I guess I did skip over this in my data discussion. How do we know this stuff? How do we have it? LexisNexis pulls from well over 10,000 unique sources. We've been doing it for, gosh, almost 40 years. It comes from state sources, comes from federal sources, comes from private sector sources. If I go, change my cell phone carrier and keep my number, change my number, whatever happens with my number, LexisNexis will be updated to that change inside of 15 minutes, and it'll be appended to my records. Long story short, it's effectively the world's largest repository of individual data, and important to this population, to the topic that we're talking about here today. It is inclusive of credit bureau data, but goes well beyond. Credit bureau data would be a great way to find out about the people who are on this phone call, who have histories of high-profile financial transactions and home ownerships and credit cards and cars and all that stuff. But in the Medicaid population, you need a broader net of source data, some of those private sector sources, some of those non-financially driven sources that we pull to get indications of where this population is and how to reach this population. So that's happy to take that as a deeper dive. That's something we're obviously very focused on. It is the core competency of LexisNexis's organization. We can take that offline if anybody wants to discuss that in more detail. Anna, you'd mentioned some other sources and contributing information in the platform. You want to mention some of that?
Yeah. So the question we ask customers is just, where does your data live? Where are you storing that? Is it on flat files on your desktop? Is it in a particular email platform you're already using? Is it MMIS? Is it LexisNexis? Where is that coming from? And then we would just talk through, hey, what's the best way to get that into Marketing Cloud and unify it with other data sets? So a lot of opportunities for coverage. The question is just, hey, where does it live today, and what would be the best route to get it in Marketing Cloud for communication outreach?
And that's important from the standpoint of some of the information that they hold, but maybe it's in a different bucket at a different agency, or maybe there have been issues in the past of getting the data sharing done. You guys have set up a facility to potentially streamline that. We always encourage states to be thinking more about what do you need to do? What do you need to have in front of you to accomplish your core message of taking care of the Medicaid members? And you guys, sounds like, have created a sort of a sandbox to facilitate some of that sharing to the benefit of the programs at large. So that makes sense. I think the last one I see, let me see if I get any more. Like the last one I see right now is, how long would this take to implement? I'll let you guys start on that one, and then I'll kind of finish up on it.
Yeah, so definitely goes on a case-by-case basis. I tell people, anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks is a good benchmark. We've done it in shorter timeframes, and we've done it in longer timeframes. So it's on a case-by-case basis. Where the nuance comes in is, hey, what channels are we using? Getting a mobile shortcode always takes longer than warming up an IP address for email. So those are the conversations that we have. But again, we've seen it done much quicker too. So it really just depends on the customer's use case. What about you, Trey, for the LexisNexis side?
From the data point, we're talking about ready to go and is being updated moment to moment, as I said, every 15 minutes in some cases. So we could deliver right away, right now. If you want to know my phone number, there it is. What the thing to consider in terms of timelines working with LexisNexis data, obviously our data is very sensitive, very personal, very protected. Federal and state laws and whatnot. The most important factor for working with us in this capacity and permissible purposes and definition of use, all of which we are very practiced in. We have to run credential all of our customers. Anyone who has the right to access and use our data goes through that credentialing process. That can be accomplished, in a couple of weeks if everybody's quickly and the lawyers get along. But it can take longer at times. What I will say is that we do have contract bases with many or most state agencies out there. We're widely used across the nation at federal, state. It's already being done where we've already credentialed an entity. That makes things very, very much quicker, and would be And it's something that we do all over the place at all levels of government. All right. Anybody else see any more questions? I did not. Looks like that's what we have. Just to wrap up, thanks again, Anna. Thanks, Rod. It was a pleasure presenting with you guys today. And thanks everybody again for joining. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.